There are several elements to the Buffalo Bills that make them a unique football team that is tough to beat. We're going to break that down for you and more today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Well, folks, welcome in. It is time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control our discussion. And we have some great things to get into today. And I feel like there's a theme. A lot of times there are themes to the questions that are sent in. And I feel like a lot of that is rooted in what makes the Bills a unique football team. And so we'll spend a lot of time breaking that down here today. I would also like to say that it's good to be back. I know it doesn't feel like I haven't been around, but the last week I was on vacation with my family. We enjoyed a wonderful week at the beach. So this is my first time in 9 days recording a podcast. And I usually record a lot of podcasts over the course of a week. And so it's very normal, but also a little bit weird to be back in front of a microphone talking right now. So if I'm a little rusty, give me some grace. I'm shaking off the rust and getting ready to gear up for the long season ahead. There's only 1 week a year where I don't record anything, and it's my 1 week at the beach with the family. And so it's nice to have that time, but it's also nice to be back in the saddle, knowing that the Buffalo Bills report for training camp this week, and it is going to be a marathon and a sprint all at the same time for the next 6+ months here on the podcast. All right, let's get into it. First one today comes from Drew, who says, I've got a question for Herd Mentality. Can you please talk about the areas where the Bills are schematic outliers? If I understand, the Bills do several things differently from all the other teams. For example, they run 5-man pass protections the most. They use 6 offensive linemen the most. They run base defense the least. I'm also under the impression that they build their team differently than any others. For example, they use 2 matchup linebackers and they don't use a traditional 1 tech defensive tackle. So here's what I'd like to know. What are the schematic or team building ways that the Bills are unique? Are there other teams that are unique in as many things? Does having this unusual of a team benefit the Bills, or would they be better off building their rosters and calling their plays like normal teams do? It's a good question. And let's start by acknowledging this. Every team has its own unique way of doing things. If you were to give me any team that has an established regime where the decision makers have been in place for long enough to really know the tendencies, I can point out a list of things for any team that's going to make them different and unique from any other team. I think coaches worth their salt add in unique elements to force opponents to prepare for uncommon things that break the rules of how the opponent wants to play offensively and defensively. That's part of building a dynamic football team. And so, again, any team that has an established regime, you should be able to identify, hey, that's what makes them a unique operation. And so you did well in your question to highlight a lot of the things that do make the Bills unique offensively and defensively. When I think about the offense, it is 5-man protections and very infrequently offering help to the offensive line and maximizing your eligible receivers on routes. I think the Bills' run scheme is very unique and dynamic, whether it's the Josh Allen layer to it, but it's really how they involve the tackles on longer poles and blend gap schemes with gap schemes with zone schemes. I think that's very different. Like you mentioned, they use the 6th offensive lineman a lot. They have a very dynamic off-script game where they acknowledge Josh Allen's really good off-script. And so Joe Brady's even said, hey, we want to be the best off-script team in the league. And so they practice those things in unique ways. And Josh Allen as your quarterback opens an inventory of options for your offense that is unmatched across the league. So you can do so many unique things just because Josh Allen is your quarterback. And because you always maximize your eligibles and you put big people on the field with the sixth offensive lineman and you can play off script, it puts a lot of stress on the defense. And it's very beneficial to the Bills' success. Defensively, the Bills are obviously a heavy nickel team, which means 5 defensive backs. They'll put 6 defensive backs on the field quite a bit. They present light boxes the most of any team in the league. And all of those decisions are usually at the expense of matching personnel. So a lot of defenses might operate where, hey, they put these players on the field, we're going to match with these players. The Bills don't do that like other teams do. They want to play the leverage and techniques that they want to play and not allow you to dictate the personnel that you want to have on the field to play offense against them. They also prefer athleticism at defensive tackle. They will go lighter and more athletic at defensive tackle. And there's a great question actually coming up in a little bit here that I want to talk about. Actually, the next question, we'll get into that athleticism at defensive tackle at the expense of maybe some size. And yeah, they do play 2 matchup linebackers where a lot of teams are still playing a traditional Mike with a weak side linebacker, and they'll have a Sam backer that sometimes play, but they'll rotate in a nickel or they'll play with a big safety in the slot where, other teams are very interested in playing different options in the slot, where the Bills are going to play Taron Johnson. And that's probably because they have Taron Johnson, right? Like, I think a lot of the decisions that you make as a football team is because of the personnel that you have. That's what good coaches do. And so, yes, those are the things that make the Bills unique in terms of team building and scheme. And again, any team with an established regime, 2-3 years of time on task, you can point to them and we can find what makes them a unique operation. But that's what's true for the Bills. Next one here comes from Charlie, who says, the Bills told us this offseason what the preferred type of defensive tackle is, which is an aggressive gap shooting up the field attacker. What are the options for defending the run with this style of interior? Can these players play gap and a half or 2 gaps? Are they hopeful for a lot of tackles for loss? Are there other options? So let's talk about this. And let me point you in the direction of an article that I wrote for the Herd Mentality Substack a couple of months ago. There's a link in today's show notes. I'd encourage anyone to check out the show notes and click on this link. And you can read something that I'm pretty proud of that I wrote that really, I think, gets into the why behind the structure of the Bills defense. And there's a couple sentences that I'd like to read to you that I think really sum up that article and this question in particular. I wrote, Buffalo's defensive approach is rooted in probabilities and what gives a football team its best chance to win games. At its core, it's about creating negative plays and turnovers while limiting explosive plays. The best way to accomplish that is by having defensive tackles that can be disruptive and do more than serve as space eaters against the run. The Bills make a lot of choices, and it's all rooted in probabilities. They want to, number one, they don't want to give you explosive plays. The most correlative way to score touchdowns, to have a touchdown producing drive, is an explosive play. The number one thing that the Bills want to do is make sure that you can't get those. So they're going to play in a lot of too high shells. They're going to play in a lot of light boxes because they don't want to give you explosive plays. Because if you get an explosive play, which I'm pretty sure is defined as 15 yards or more, your probability of scoring a touchdown quadruples on that drive. The Bills say, okay, we know that. We want to limit that. Then the reality is, in terms of EPA, teams achieve better EPA throwing the ball than running the ball, right? So the Bills want to play defense in a way that's harder to pass, and it's harder to create explosive plays passing the ball. And in doing that, they want to be able to get up the field and attack and create negative plays and turnovers. That's the formula. That's the formula. And I know that, unfortunately, you're going to point to, well, it hasn't worked against the Chiefs. Yeah, you're right. You're right. It hasn't worked against the Chiefs in the playoffs. They've been close. These games are not blowouts. The offense has had their chance the last 2 years to score and win the game, and it hasn't happened. But I think you can look even at those games and look at some of the probabilities and realize that it gave the Bills a chance, even against the Ravens last year in the playoff game that they won. I think leaning into probabilities helped. Now, obviously, that required the Ravens to make some unforced errors, But that's part of the script. When you have Josh Allen as your quarterback, you can make some choices in how you play defensively because you know you're going to be able to probably score some points. And so that's at its core what the Bills want to do. They don't want to play this Belichick style of defense where everyone's a fire hydrant up front and there's tanks against the run and you can out athlete them up front. That's not what the Bills want to do. They want to play to create negative plays, put you in bad positions, take away the football. And Sean McDermott for the last 12 years has had a top 10 defense in taking away the football. And that's not just because they have Josh Allen and there's leads. That is the Bills without Josh Allen. That's Bills with Josh Allen before Josh Allen was Josh Allen. That's the Panthers. That's multiple different quarterbacks with the Panthers. It's a pretty proven, tried and true thing that can happen. And Sean McDermott is living proof of that. So that's at its core. I expand a ton of that on that in the herd mentality article. So click on the show notes and you will see a link to that. All right, tons more to get to, including a really compelling question about these new contracts for the Jets that they gave to Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner and how that compares to some contracts the Bills gave out. We'll talk about that and more. So folks, be sure to stick with me. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with daily promotions and fun ways to bet. I always like to log in the morning and see what profit boosts are available to me, and lately it's been the same game parlays for Major League Baseball. There's also football's futures bets on there. Right now, you can get the Bills at plus 360 to win the AFC. You can get Josh Allen at plus 135 to throw 30 regular season touchdown passes. How about this? You think 1,000 yards is coming for Khalil Shakir? You can get that at plus 270. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. This is an ad by BetterHelp. Workplace stress is at an all-time high. 61% of the global workforce is reporting higher than normal stress levels. This summer is the perfect time to take small steps to focus on your wellness and manage the challenges that come with your workday. Of course, most of us can't just quit our jobs or take endless vacations, but we can start small, whether it's getting outside for a few minutes, adding movement into your day, or talking to someone who can help you navigate life's challenges. That's where BetterHelp comes in. Do you have any boundaries that you've been wanting to set? Well, therapy can help you set healthier boundaries at work so stress doesn't spill over into the rest of your life. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Unwind from work with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, let's keep it moving here. The next one comes from Alex. Alex says, comparing Bills contracts to recent Jets contracts, would you rather have Khalil Shakir for $13.3 million per season or Garrett Wilson for $32.5 million per season? And the same question for Christian Benford at $17.3 million a season versus Sauce Gardner at $30.1 million per season. Well, first of all, I would comfortably, and I mean comfortably, take Christian Benford at 17.3 over Sauce at 30.1. That's an insane gap, in my opinion, for what those players offer. I take Christian Benford for the same money, let alone an extra $13 million. I don't know that Sauce Gardner deal is a bad one. I think it's just that Christian Benford is now an insane value based on what J.C. Horn and Pat Surtain and Sauce Gardner just got. That's an crazy good value. As for the Garrett Wilson at 32.5 versus Khalil Shakir at 13.3, that's exactly the question the Bills want you to ask. That's exactly their approach at wide receiver. The Bills are getting Khalil Shakir, Josh Palmer, Curtis Samuel, and Keon Coleman for the same AAV that the Jets are giving Garrett Wilson. The question is, are all of those players a better investment of $32.5 million, or is just Garrett Wilson at $32.5 million? I think the world of Garrett Wilson. You've heard me rave about the guy. It's exactly the type of skill set that I love. Dynamic route running, really good hands, yards after catch, can win at every level of the field. He's exactly the type of receiver I love in the NFL. Love to have him. But the opportunity cost is real. Just Garrett Wilson at 32.5 or Khalil Shakir plus the rest of your room, basically. Or Khalil Shakir plus other players at other positions. The value is always going to be in the depth, right? Like, that's devastating. If Garrett Wilson goes down, that's devastating. Not only do you have a huge commitment there, but you don't have the depth behind it because of the commitment that you have in Garrett Wilson. Again, I think the world of Garrett Wilson, but I'm not paying him $20 million more than Khalil Shakir. I'd rather have two Khalil Shakirs. That's exactly how the Bills want you to look at this. It's a doozy, says this. Could you elaborate a bit on the situational benefit to different coverage packages? For instances, I know we have two coverage linebackers plus Taron Johnson. So what situations would make dime packages more appealing calls than just keeping those guys out there? How much of this strategy has to do with alignment and leverage, and how much has to do with what horses a team has in the stable? Thanks, and go Bills. Yeah, so the Bills' base defense is a good coverage defense because it's nickel. It's nickel with Taron Johnson and two matchup linebackers. That's good. You love that. The advantage of going dime, which is 6 defensive backs, and again, the Bills get to dime 2 different ways. Sometimes they'll pull off Milano and put in another DB. Sometimes they'll go with a 3-man front and put in a DB and have 2 backers. So they can get to 6 DBs in a couple of different ways. And it's more of a situational thing that they tap into. But what it comes down to is the dime is beneficial when the passing, it's going to obviously be a pass, right? You want to have better coverage players on the field. So even if you drop Milano or you drop a defensive lineman, of course, for a safety or a corner, you're going to get better coverage players on the field. And that's what it comes down to. It helps you on passing downs. Now, the Bills have incorporated an odd mirror, which is they'll go with a 3-man front and 2 backers, and then there'll be a dime, it'll be still be 6 defensive backs. And that allows them to spy and contain more of the Lamar Jacksons or the Patrick Mahomes. We've seen that happen. That's when that's beneficial. But the Bills are very equipped personnel-wise if they want to be diverse with sub-packages with a Cam Lewis or Jamarcus Ingram or Jordan Hancock. They got some depth at safety. Even a corner like Trey White. Trey White was the dime defensive back for Baltimore last year, and they moved some players around so he can get on the field. So it's about getting your best coverage players on the field on obvious passing downs, and the Bills will sometimes do that and bring in a 6th defensive back and get there in a couple of different ways. But the benefit is, hey, we know it's a pass. We want even more coverage players than our base nickel defense. Mark says, you did the Buffalo Bills roster ranking as it pertains to the rest of the league on the podcast last week. I was wondering if you took the quarterback scores away from every team and recalculated the rankings, where would the Bills roster rank and maybe some of the other contenders? Might be a decent way to evaluate how well Brandon Beane has built the roster around Josh Allen. It's a fantastic question, and that's exactly I have the ability to answer that based on the methodology that Kyle Krabs and I have in grading every NFL roster. So we can take away any component of it and tell you where it ranks. So if I take away quarterback, which obviously helps the Bills, and I take away coaching, which does help the Bills as well, the Bills rank 7th. The Bills have the 7th best roster with no coaching added, with no quarterback added. So remainder of team, 7th best. We have the Ravens at 1. We have the Eagles at 2. The Vikings at 3. Steelers at 4. Broncos at 5. Lions at 6. Bills at 7. Where are the Chiefs? 18. That's how much quarterback and coaching, right? Andy Reid plus Steve Spagnuolo, maybe the best play caller on both sides of the ball of the last 20 years in the NFL. Plus Patrick Mahomes, who is obviously a top 4 quarterback in the league. That boosts them up. Remainder of team 18th. So the Bills, number 7, is pretty good. Pretty solid, knowing that you have the best quarterback in the NFL. All right, we got a whole lot more to get to, including another question about the Bills and other top teams in the AFC. How would the Bills do with Josh Allen during the Tom Brady era. We'll talk about that and more on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with me. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average, in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. All right, Michael says this. Hey, Joe, it's Michael, born and raised in Rochester, and like you, currently living in Charlotte, North Carolina. Here's the question. Compared to the other top teams in the AFC, let's say the Chiefs, Ravens, and Bengals, since they've kind of had the Bills' number over the years, how would you evaluate how the Bills have done this offseason in terms of addressing issues, getting better overall, and putting themselves in the best position to make a Super Bowl run? And if you had to rank those teams, considering players, coaching staff, and everything else, how would you stack them in terms of best chances to reach a Super Bowl based on their overall progress? I know there's some guesswork here, especially with how rookies might shake out on the D-line, suspensions, but do your best. I'm curious to hear your take. I think the Bills have done well to help their team in the areas that they needed the most help. They've added defensive reinforcements that should make them better in coverage, that should make them better rushing the passer, which should ultimately help their third down defense, which was the problem last year. Couldn't stop the pass, and as a consequence of that, you couldn't get off the field on third downs. And so, I mean, with the D-line investments, with the secondary investments, you'd love to think that that is going to take a good turn. They also added route runners at wide receiver, which I thought was the biggest problem the offense had. Not enough dynamic separators, and I think with the arrival of Josh Palmer and Elijah Moore, that certainly helps. So I like how the Bills have positioned themselves with very limited resources this offseason. It's not like they were brimming with cap space. I thought they did a lot with a modest amount of opportunity to enhance critical areas of the team. So I think they're in good shape. I do think that the Ravens have the best roster in the AFC, and I think when the Ravens play their best football, it's the best in the league. Fortunately, for everyone outside of Baltimore, is they don't play their best football in the playoffs. And I'm sure they're figuring that out, right? That's the question they're asking themselves. But their A game is the best in the league. And I still believe that. I think Kansas City had a good offseason. In some ways, I like how they reinforced their defense. I still think there is defensive line questions there. I think they have a lot that needs to come together offensively. That left side of the offensive line, working in Rashee Rice, what's he going to be like? Travis Kelce kind of fading out. Can they become better running the football? Can they become more explosive running the football? There's a lot to figure out on offense. And for the Bengals, this is a team that hasn't made the playoffs in 2 years. I'm not dismissing the Bengals. I think the world of Joe Burrow, and I think their passing game is the best passing game in the NFL. That's all I respect about that team. I don't respect the run game, and I sure as heck don't respect their defense. So they have major questions outside of their ability to throw the football. So I would say the Ravens, to me, are the best team in the AFC. Then I would say the Bills. Then I would say the Chiefs. And I'm not sure that the Bengals are the fourth best team, although they have the best passing game, and that's pretty cool. But the rest of that operation, it's just a lot of issues. As far as positioning to win the Super Bowl, I'm not sure it's a capacity thing as it is, hey, make the plays. Make a couple more plays in the playoffs. Dalton Kincaid, catch the ball. James Cook hit the block so that Josh can hit Curtis Samuel on that game-winning drive. Just make one or two more plays. I think that's what it comes down to. They have the capacity to do it. Richard says, we all know the dominance and legacy of Tom Brady. The question is, if Josh Allen was quarterbacking for the Bills during this time, would Brady have the same amount of success and dominance over the division? Or would Buffalo have had more success than they had? There were some excellent playmakers during that time, and I can't help to think that the Bills would have had a better run. Follow-up question, do you think the Bills offense would have been better in that era or better where they are now? Well, I think the Bills would have been far better, obviously. They would have upgraded the worst part of their team, which was quarterback, with the best player they've ever had at the position in franchise history. And, certainly one of the modern greats in Josh Allen. They'd be a much better team. Some of those teams, I would agree with you, had some good talents, had some good playmakers, but with nothing at quarterback, plus Tom Brady in the division, you weren't going anywhere. You knew it. And I think a side effect to the Patriots run was what happened to the rest of the division. The Bills, Jets, and Dolphins were spinning their tires for 20 years trying to sniff the Patriots, and they really couldn't. From 2001 to 2019, which is when Brady was a starter for the Patriots, the Bills had 8 different head coaches, the Dolphins had 8 different head coaches, and the Jets had 6. You are not committed to anything for long enough to see it together to come close to knocking off the Patriots. Now, look, I get it. You can't stay committed to mistakes and wrong hires. But at some point, you needed to be committed to something to give yourself a chance to go against the operation that was the New England Patriots under Belichick and Brady. So, yeah, it would have been a lot tougher on them for sure. If Josh Allen was in the division, are you kidding? That would have changed a lot. But I think the Patriots benefited from a consequence of their dominance being the Jets, Bills, and Dolphins just kept spinning their tires, going nowhere. Josh says, I remember when we signed Michael Hoyt, you talked about his positional flexibility and the various ways the Rams deployed him. When he comes back from suspension, what kind of ways could you see us utilizing his Swiss Army knife type flexibility? Also, does that allow us to bump off a guy from linebacker and stay heavy at defensive end and defensive tackle? I think that again, this is predictive. I think Michael Hoyt is going to live on the edges. I think he's going to play a lot of defensive end, not so much interior defensive line, maybe some stand-up rush backer, maybe some Sam linebacker. I think he's going to be a hybrid edge type player for the Bills. I think he'll help the Bills run a lot of simulated pressures. I think that's what it comes down to. And I do think that is a very worthy talking point that the Bills like to go 6 linebackers. I think your path to going 5 is Michael Hoyt being one of your defensive ends because of the versatility. So I think that's what he unlocks for this team. A lot of the Lorenzo Alexander stuff. I think that's exactly kind of the possibility that exists there. Devin says, do you think anyone can have a career resurgence like Chase Claypool was having last year before the freak injury? He mentioned going from last in the depth chart to first team reps. And I was curious if you could see anyone having that kind of preseason. So what Devin's referring to is Chase Claypool put out like a social media post talking about this journey and the gratitude he had for the Bills and saying, look, he went from getting, last line of the depth chart to first team reps. This is a guy looking for work, right? Ultimately looking for work. I'm not going to call it a career resurgence. But I mean, obviously he did have an injury that took away from the trajectory that he was on. But, this is a receiver that's the middle of July. He wants to get to someone's training camp. So let's keep that in mind. I'm stopping way short of calling it a career resurgence. The last 2 years of Chase Claypool's career before he got to Buffalo were ultimate disasters. So I want to caution on calling that a career resurgence. As far as is there somebody that you could kind of see this happening with the Bills? I don't know that there's a lot of contenders. I would love to say Laviska Shenault, but I struggled to buy it with him. I really didn't like his returner tape last year, and I don't know that he offers anything else to a football team. The skill set just doesn't speak to me. But a guy that had a little bit of success early in his career, hype coming out of college, second-round pick, multiple teams, that's the parallel. And I'm not sure anyone else really qualifies. There's players that have had some buzz, like Elijah Moore, but I mean Elijah Moore is still writing his story. So I think Laviska Shenault is the answer to this, but I'll stop short of calling it a career resurgence for Shenault or even Chase Claypool because he went from being an afterthought to getting some first-team reps in the offseason. I think there's a lot more that needed to sort out there. All right, folks, there you have it. Bills report for training camp on Tuesday. We got Bill Squad on Monday afternoon. That's going to run at 12 o'clock Eastern time. Jeremy White and I are going to do a 53-man roster projection for the Bills going into camp. So that is coming midday on Monday, and then it is training camp coverage wire to wire. So it's here, folks. News will be coming in fast and furious. Excited for the content plan and excited to talk through the 2025 season with you. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.